Everybody here again. We are at episode number 6 of our Cybersecurity Defense Ecosystem podcast. And we've got the three amigos here, Nim, Evgeniy, and Adam. And we'll talk about what's going on in cyber these days. Look, man, you guys have been traveling a lot the last month. How's it going, Nim? How was your travel this month? And what did you see? It's crazy.
Been great. It's been a lot of travel, you're right. The what hit home for me was being able to be in Mexico, looking at and speaking with the Mexican business leaders and enterprise leaders, talking about their cybersecurity posture and how things need to change. And it's the reality is everyone who has anything to do with critical infrastructure or any form of data that could be valuable on the dark web is a target. And so that basically is everybody, right? It was very surprising for me when, I was hanging out down there with a bunch of my US counterparts, like, oh, we didn't realize Mexico was an active target. Meanwhile, they've had, just as many cyber incidences and breaches as we see here in the North American market. Kind of just normalizes it for you to say, look, it's not just happening to us, it's happening everywhere. And we are a global marketplace when you look at kind of how we transact business on the internet and online and across different regions. It makes you want to make sure that as an organization to ask these questions like, how safe are our global suppliers? How safe are our global, divisions, partners, business groups? Because the threat comes from anywhere. It literally has no borders.
Well, man, I guess the hackers habla español, I guess, if that's the correct pronunciation. I probably screwed that up,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming you had some Mexican food down there. And by the way, we do know one thing: the Mexican food down there is different from the Mexican food we get up here.
100%, man.
Yeah,
100%.
somebody should come up from Mexico and open up a restaurant up here, but it's another story, man.
Yeah.
Adam, what was your journey like over the last 30 days, and what has made you really mad about cyber?
Well, I don't get too mad easily because I've been doing this too long. But one quick thing, kind of with regards to what Nim was saying, we have some customers that have, I guess you'd call them suppliers, like call centers, primarily in Mexico and even in Central and South America. And so we have to, do questionnaires and for risk assessments and all that with because there's a lot of interconnections there, right? They have access to the sensitive data. So we have to look at, do they have SOC 2, all that stuff. So yeah, it's very, yeah, the threat is definitely there. We've had a few sort of incidents with some of those, but that's kind of just sort of agreeing that, with NIM that the supply chain security there and vendor security is really important, regardless of where they're at. Um, but
Well, they
yeah,
go after
it's
the
not
weakest
a,
link, right? Wherever the weakest link is, right? If that's in, I don't know, call a country, right? Wherever that
yeah.
weak link is, that's where they're going, right?
Yep.
What else?
And but I haven't had too much travel, just a little customer travel here and there, doing some assessments and tabletops on site. So that was really good. Um, there's been some very interesting, and I don't like to name names, but there's been some very high profile attacks on some vendors. Some of them are supply chain, major, like code, source code compromise and, still going on. And others, maybe um, there was an initial thought on what it could have been. And then, oh, by the way, now there's this other impact. So, and this kind of goes to, people ask, and I think we've talked about this before at some point, like, when you're going through an incident response, you get a lot of people over your shoulder, like, suppliers, partners, customers, lawyers, everybody. Well, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? So sometimes it's just like, you need to let us do our job because if we
Chill.
go, because if we tell you something and we're not sure, then it could cause more harm than not, and so it's really important to give people space when they're doing this, but it's also important that when you have something that you're sure of that you can share, that you share it. I think sometimes we see though that it looks like, wow, man, this is like not at all what we thought it was, and it's way worse. So, yeah.
Well, we'll dig into the pen testing stuff right after this, but Evgeniy, how was your travels, man? You've been around.
Been traveling quite a lot. Vegas, California, here in Canada as well. A lot of customers meeting as well, talking to customers, understanding their problems, understanding what they see. A few interesting insights for me as well is that we're talking about AI a lot. And right now, people kind of a bit shifted to the like, from not from, oh my God, AI is magical, is prove me how AI is working. Prove me that my information is not going somewhere it's not supposed to be going. Prove me that you have actually good use of AI. So this conversation comes from customers right now. A very interesting conversation about it's not magical anymore. We know it can do stuff, but we don't just trust it because you just hold it there. So this is very good in my mind because people are more aware that it's not just like, oh, I put this interesting tool, magic wand, and it's working. It's not really like that. So this is made me think a lot about what data we need to create, what data we need to collect, what do we need to show our customers that they will feel that they're secure, that their information handling correctly, that we're actually using this AI for good, if you can say this as well, and how much we rely on AI as well. What happens if something broke on the back? What will still work, or we're going to lose a lot of the functionality? This is one part. I also see people. Adam mentioned assessment. Unfortunately, I see customers not doing self-assessment. Like self-assessment is such a big part in my mind of even any other framework, or even like self-diagnostic. If you're talking about human body, for example, or some kind of understanding. And me, by talking with customers that for the last 4 or 5 shows I've been, like how often do you do health checks on the environment? People are like, we don't really because we chasing putting down fires. So how do we help people to not just reactively, but proactively help them to make sure they have what they need? And I know we want to talk about pen testing. One of the ways proactively help, but not just pen testing. There are many other different things. So I'm happy to dive in on some of the proactive part on assessment and self-diagnostic that we can kind of collaborate and see how can people help themselves before they go and pay hundreds of $1,000s to somebody else.
Let's dig into this then, man. So the world of cyber and AI never sleeps. Man, it's always something going on. And yeah, major breaches from major companies recently, and have no clue what the impact of that is. Apparently, I heard that the bad actors, have been in there for like a long time, like a year, swimming around in the code. So I don't know if we know the story is. And to follow up on you, Evgeny, I'm not even sure you could even guarantee anybody that whatever you do in AI is never going to get out in the wild. But that's for another conversation. Nim, let's kick it off with you, man. So the world of pen testing, assessing your tech stack, knowing what you don't know, right? Because that's the thing that's going to ultimately hurt you, right? What's your take on what's going on? Are people doing it? Do they care? What's happening?
I think there's two schools of thoughts on the pen testing. There's one school that, hey, we have a vulnerability management program. We are a cloud first company that's all in AWS or all in Microsoft. We don't have on-prem servers. We should be okay. We don't need to do a pen test because we have a VMS approach. And then there's another group that we come across often that says, hey, we do all our VMS, we have our vulnerability management strategy, we have those touch points, but we still do an annual pen test. And both are good habits, but I disagree with both. I think that
Is there a third?
I think there is a third, and it's something that at the speed at which information is growing, architecture is changing, tools are deploying, and things are changing every day. A point-in-time test is great. Nothing will ever replace the human pen test, but there needs to be tools invoked that do some form of continuous exploitation management that are trying to break into your environment on a regular, periodic basis that you could track, monitor, watch, prioritize the fixes, and focus on. Because by the time you get your pen test done, which is quarterly or biannually or annually, that data is old. If you've had any gaps, those gaps have already been in your system for some time. And in the nature of, transactions that are happening, data that's being created and distributed, the velocity at which you're creating, inferred data within the organization. How much of this do you want to protect? How much of this do you want to start governing? And if you're not doing proper pen tests, you're not actually paying attention to the true holes in your environment.
So now a lot
Vulnerability
of people
management
talk about
program is
pen
not.
testing, but it's expensive, right? Human pen test is not cheap, right? The automated one, I see a lot of folks offering it on a kind of a monthly fee basis. I really don't know, if there was a way to grade them. Like an automated pen test takes you up to like a 7, and a human pen test takes you up to a 9, 9.5. I don't know if there's a scale like this, but what's your thoughts on the pricing and how is the automated versus the human work out together?
It's got to be dynamic. I think, yes, all of these, buying vitamins, going to a gym and working out is expensive. It takes time, but it's better than ending up under the knife, right? Or falling sick. So this is kind of how I look at it. And yes, you're correct. Nothing is going to change that human pen test. The dynamic experience of doing it that way is unique, but having a way of continuously testing it and managing this is key. I mean, Adam, you've definitely got a good position on that.
Yeah, and I agree. And you do need a continuous testing. And there's different types of pen test, right? And you brought up vulnerability management, vulnerability assessments, and scanning and things like that. And those, I'm glad you brought that up because, those are important things to do just from a hygiene perspective so that, hopefully when you get a pen test, it's not all Fs, right? They didn't get in and root around and you make it at least make it a little bit challenging for them, right? And the other thing you brought up, which is really accurate, is that changes are happening in the threat landscape all the time, and not just new vulnerabilities, but but also like there may be a change in the environment that causes your system to be more vulnerable, and so. The automated systems are great. I think that everybody should do them. The pricing is not terrible on them. But they're gonna get a certain sort of level of the vulnerabilities and they might exploit a small amount of things. When you do a test that a human is doing, it's going to go a lot deeper. And that also depends on the scope. Do you have web apps that need to be tested or not? Do you want to do internal? I always like to say, you should change up the scope often, right? So you have to your point, Julian, everybody has budget constraints, right? So whatever you can afford, you should do. And, it's expensive, but kind of to your analogy, Nim, it's a lot cheaper than if you actually have an incident, right? That could cost
ton of money,
thousands and millions potentially. So, and not to mention all the liability.
So if you had to, Evgeniy, if you had to do the right thing, right? What are we looking at? I mean, it's like a human pen test once a month, plus a continuous pen test automated every day, 24/7. Like, what is the ideal situation looks like before we go a little bit too crazy on it and just do a human pen test every day, I guess. But what is there a balance?
There is a balance. And I think there's ideal because everyone is different. And I also personally like to separate between type of companies. So to simplify it in my mind, at least, is there's companies that have their own application, also their own data center, but there's companies that fully consume SaaS applications. I'll always like to talk about marketing. Marketing companies usually don't have their own application. They use something else. Or versus companies that are doing insurance, for example. They have their internal shared services and they have their production services, where they have the application. So the security of the pen testing is going to be a bit different. But to answer your question, me personally, I will separate this between what we can automate. And automation, for example, when you're talking about cloud, when we put new code, when we upload anything to cloud, we can use CI/CD pipeline that will automatically will do, if done correctly, checks and validation about are we exposing and creating new problems, because we want to minimize new problems that we create ourselves. This is where the automation can, but we can still do human pen testing for unknown stuff that we're not familiar with, because there's always new vulnerabilities that comes out that you cannot find them because they were not disclosed yet. This is one part. Two, I will proactively optimize what you already have, because in many cases, we have tools and we have expertise and capabilities that we just don't use. Funny example, I was just talking to a friend of mine that she got herself a new oven. And then technician came to check something with a refrigerator and asked her, why do you have an oven? He's like, oh, because I need to cook. He's like, but your microwave can also be oven. She's like, I didn't know about that. So she had a very high-end microwave that can do oven-type cooking as well. So she returned the oven because she didn't realize the tools she have. And I see it all the time at cybersecurity. We have an amazing set of tools that we
Wait a
don't
minute, you're
use.
saying microwaves can be an oven? Like, what, am
Apparently.
I living under a rock?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I have one of those.
I got one.
You see?
Damn, I guess I'm the only one who don't cook
It's also
stuff,
an air
man.
fryer.
Because you don't inviting us for barbecue. If you invite us for barbecue, we'll show you all the tools.
I'm telling you, if the barbecue happened, we could have fixed all this.
There you go.
And,
So I get it, man. So you gotta know the tools you got, right, in your game. Is this MDR thing, like monitoring and threat hunting, is that a kind of a form of pen testing, or is that in place of, or you
I think
can?
it's a more hunting than pen testing. We're doing in my mind, we're doing assumptions based on something, and we're validating our assumptions. So pen testing is a bit different, but depending on how you slice and dice it, you can say it as well.
Well,
Okay.
and there are some services, usually more on the high end, that will have some like red team tape capabilities and other types of capabilities in addition to the defensive side of things. But generally, the MDR is just focused on more monitoring and reactive. And your pen tester, you know, if the MDR is good, they're gonna flag some of their activities.
But at the end of
That's a very interesting thing. Actually,
yeah.
we've done pen tests where we got in and completely owned a domain. Guess who did not alert, or guess what? There was no alert, no nothing. How embarrassing for that group. And we were all over the place. This has happened to about 3 or 4 times. Now there's been other times where we got stopped butt cold and that was good, right? So
Yeah.
it's both sides, both teams.
So I mean, the threat hunters, right? They've got to be monitoring the anomalies, and they're the catch-all, right? They're the last line of defense in a way, because if they miss stuff, then game over, right? Pen test miss stuff, right? The automated pen test miss stuff. You're hoping that they don't miss it, all right? But if they miss it, then it's kind of game over, right? Then let's round this out, this pen testing game. What are you recommending people do?
I'm recommending that people make every effort they can to understand what are the actual exploitable holes in their environment and prioritize fixing those. You might have 99 vulnerabilities, but the exploitable ones are 2 of them. And those are the 2 that you should move all your ships into fixing, because the other ones are just vulnerabilities. They haven't been exploitable. And that exercise comes from having a layered defense approach, where you've got your proper vulnerability management tool, you've got your EDR and your MDR tool running, you have your annual, biannual, quarterly pen test, but you're using some form of continuous monitoring in your environment that you identify, hey, here are the 2 things that I really got to focus on, because I got all these vulnerabilities, but these 2 are exploitable right now. And here's proof that they are exploitable. So I got to go fix them, right? That's that dynamic prioritization, reprioritization that you need to be doing in the business.
So are we seeing that the AI, like everybody's baked AI into their game now, right? Are we seeing AI picking up a bit of the workload and filling some of the gaps? Like, for example, patching, missing, here's something you should be looking at that you missed. Is AI today helping, reduce that gap? Are you seeing it or not?
I think every tool every organization has included some form of AI capability within their tooling, right? But that tooling alone, leaning in on that, I wouldn't say it's mature enough to say that that's a de facto security program. Say, yes, AI is doing a great job within each individual tool, helping the value realization of those individual tools. But I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, no, that's all you need these days. I don't think it's there yet.
Okay. Look, so we've seen a lot of the software, in the software apps that we're using getting breached, right? And the last time I checked, I don't know if I'm right or wrong here, but you really can't do a pen test on an application that you're using, right? So it's up to the vendors to, pen test, I guess, and debug their system. I mean, it's almost like impossible for us to, take on that burden as well. So what's your advice when it comes to where the application fails the system? Anybody want to take a crack at that?
Well, I'll start off just by obviously, when you go to evaluate a new system, any sort of SaaS application or AI platform, whatever it is, you have to evaluate risk on it, right? So we get asked to do this all the time as vCISOs. So you look at the trust center, you look at the certifications, you look at, if they've had any breaches in the past. And then of course, before you do all that, we've touched on this before. You make sure that the business case is valid, right? Somebody's asking you for this. Is there something we already have that could already do it? Okay, let's say we get past all that. So we have to evaluate the risk. So we look at all those things, look at the trust center, the certifications, all those things. Sometimes, often you can get not the full pen test report, but you can get like an attestation, sort of like a high level thing. Okay,
plus minus B, whatever.
Yeah. And usually what'll happen is, and I was like my other company that is a cybersecurity AI platform. We had some vulnerabilities. I mean, I'll be honest, like we're not perfect, right? Before we launched, there were vulnerabilities. That's why we hired somebody else. We could have done it ourselves. We don't grade our own homework, right? So, but we fixed all those things. And then now, if you ask us, we can give you a high level thing. So it's clean now, right, from that perspective. But we don't stop there. We have to continue to do it, and that's something these companies, they have to continuously keep up their testing.
These companies we're talking about are like top end companies, right? Like they're huge companies, and I'm sure if we went in their portfolio, they'll say like AAA, AAA, whatever, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, we really can't do anything about that, right? Or like, how do we fix that? I mean, we can't fix that, right? I mean, it's impossible.
Well, I think, like I said, you evaluate the risk on the front end. And again, you have to look at what data you're putting in there and do you feel like that's an acceptable risk to the business? And then the other thing I would say, I mentioned earlier is, okay, have they had any incidents or breaches? If they have, how did they handle that? Were they transparent? Did they clean it up properly? Did they get stronger and better and faster because of it? Or was it a freaking debacle, So.
Maybe you want to take a stab at that, or Evgeniy, what's your thoughts on how do we look at widening the scope of pen testing, right? So that what other things we need to be worried about? The applications that these companies are developing and selling to us as part of our tech stack is, I think, even more difficult to manage and so on. The supply chain, definitely the weakest link, is something. What else should we be worried about?
I don't know if it's a word on a word, but how we can, in my mind, simplify it is when we work in our environment, people in many cases don't have very good diagrams of their own environment, their own architectures, how it's actually working. And because it's becoming very complex very fast, if we have up-to-date information on what we're creating, what we're developing, when we do the pen testing, now we have an options to do maybe once a year a complete pen test. But then we can do section by section in the environment to simplify this. Not going to be very expensive, but still trying to go deep in the application to find potential problems. And unfortunately, many people have some kind of in their head ideas how it's working, but not very documented. Another part that it's very important is the entire idea of APIs. We all right now use APIs. And in some cases, we have business logic that it's broken. We just didn't know about it. Some cases, vulnerability, some cases, other parts. So documenting your API, understanding your API, what can be done, what cannot be done, how it's alerted, will be also helping the companies later on. Furthermore, when you're going to sell or work with someone, showing them the diagrams, not every information correct, it's showing maturity that you know what's happening, that you understand your application. Because when you have this information, people know that you spend time to create this.
But I would assume don't put that diagram on the internet, because if that ends up in the dark web, that's a gold mine. Hey, look, I got an interesting question. So let's say and because of the recent breaches of these big brands, right? Let's say you're using this product in your portfolio, right? Your tech stack. And then you heard today at 8 o'clock, boom, there's been a breach in this platform, this software. Like, what do you do? Do you go and pull the plugs? Like what happened? What should you do? How should you react?
Well, each case is different.
Each case is unique, right? But the first question that comes to my mind, and Evgeniy touched on it, is when you subscribe to these SaaS applications and these large SaaS organizations, you are consenting to accepting a certain amount of risk that this is a joint risk program. You're at their mercy, at their infrastructure and their architecture, and if anything happens on their platform. So the first thing, to Evgeniy's point, is understand your API. What data are we sharing? What data are we interacting? How are we communicating and collaborating with this platform? And then understanding, hey, have they shared what the patch is and what the fix is? If it was a 0-day, but they know what they could do to mitigate the risk further to their clients, that communication should have come out. Now it's on you to know whether or not how quickly you can act to plug that hole, right? And then work out, has there been an exposure? What are some of the downstream challenges you're dealing with? But I always say it's, in this situation, it's very much like buying a used car. Just because it didn't have it on the Carfax, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen to you.
Man, it's almost like you got to be on the ball 24/7. So let's do a bit of a wrap up here. So the great news is we're all getting together in November 26th and talk about these things in great detail with a whole whackload of amazing experts in the field. But how do we want to wrap this up? What's going on? What's on your mind, Nim? What do you want people to know? What's going on your side? And we'll do the rotation here.
On my side, sticking to the pen test theme, really understand which of your vulnerabilities are exploitable. Spend some time prioritizing it, documenting the risk, understanding that we all have limited resources. So with the limited resources we have, what do we need to focus on to maximize making sure that we've got the right protection in place? So go through that exercise, find out which of the vulnerabilities are actually exploitable and focus on those.
Adam, what's your take, brother? And anything that you want them to know about?
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking there a little bit, just, make sure that you've done a risk assessment, and you do that at least annually so that what's my golden, data mine, right? So what's the most important assets, and where does that information live? And then from there, how is it exposed? So we want to do continuous vulnerability testing. If we can also do some continuous pen testing as well, that's great. But looking at the attack surface there, minimizing that, tying that in with the vulnerability management program, and then definitely recommend a human pen test. And again, it all depends on, to Evgeniy's point, it all depends on the environment. Do we have our own applications, or do we have a lot of outsourced things? So you really need to take all those things into account and go from there.
A lot of moving parts. Evgeniy?
I'm going to approach a bit different because I think Nim and Adam already covered the important points from their perspective. I want to focus a bit about roles and responsibilities. Who is actually doing what? when the problem found, Adam mentioned that they did tests and nobody knew about it. So in your company, who is doing what? But it's not just your company. You maybe outsource part of your environment. You maybe have third-party management of people or SaaS application. So outline and think about it. If you have a problem or when you're going to have a problem, who are you going to call? When you're going to call them? What's it going to do? And it's definitely important to play out these scenarios, but understand who people will call during the night. Unfortunately, today, while we're recording this particular episode, AWS is down. Many applications are down right now. Many people are suffering. I'm talking to people, and my first question is like, hey, what's down? I think this and this. Like, what do you mean you think? You don't know what's down? Who's responsible? Who's affected? So there is parts in the environment that back to asset management in a way, and asset management in this case could be applications that are responsible. Who's going to be responsible to them? How are you going to track them? How you understand what's happening? So we're not even talking right now why the problem would happen, but it's right now something happened and we want to know who will do what. So spending some time to create ratio charts, understanding who's responsible and what, I think is very, very important to mature yourself.
Well, look, man, if something goes bad, I know the three people I'm going to call.
So don't call me. I'm not going to answer them.
You guys could fix anything, man. I mean, you guys are the A-team. Look, we'll be reaching out to everybody again. We're going to hang out on November 26th and bring the whole gang together and see what we can do if we can solve the problem, man. Helping what? Solve the future of cybersecurity together. Is that our thing these days? What do you think?
I think we should get cake.
Together
and barbecue.
We'll have cake, we'll have barbecue, we'll have everything there, man. All right, brothers. See you later. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.